Hello everyone, this is Leah Whitehorse from Law Astrology, and in this recording I'm going to be looking at the transit of Saturn through Pisces. So Saturn enters Pisces on the 7th of March 2023 and it'll remain in this sign until the 25th of May 2025 when it moves into Aries. But it will go back into Pisces to complete that story from September the 1st, 2025 through to February the 14th, 2026. And then Saturn will move on properly into Aries. So who is Saturn? It is suggested that the Roman Saturn has its history is connected with the Greek Titan Kronos. Now, the most common story that centers around Kronos is connected to how he killed his father. Basically, he wanted his father's power. His father was Uranus, and Kronos's mother, Gaia, decided a really good way to get rid of Uranus would be to castrate him. So Kronos was the only one who was willing to go ahead with this. So he took the sickle that Gaia left for him and castrated his father and therefore overthrew him. However, there was a prophecy that Kronos' son, or one of his sons, would overthrow him. So Kronos decided to devour all of his own children, but his wife Rhea outwitted him, Zeus survived, and eventually Zeus, otherwise known as Jupiter, overthrew Kronos. Kronos was thrown into Tartarus, this deep abyss, the deepest abyss in the world, which was like this dungeon. It was a place for the wicked. It was like a prison for the Titans. Eventually, he was released from there. And we still see the vestiges of this story from the Greek Kronos in the symbol for Saturn. The symbol for Saturn is actually a scythe or a sickle, so the thing that he used to castrate his father. But Saturn in Roman mythology was also connected to agriculture. He was the god of seeds and sowing time, but also Saturn is the god of time. So he's connected with the sowing, but he is also connected with the reaping. Again, the scythe used for harvesting. The symbol of Saturn is also used as the symbol for the element of lead. Now, I know when I was young, I was taught that lead is the heaviest metal. Technically it isn't, but we do use the word lead to describe a feeling of heaviness. We use the phrase, it went down like a lead balloon, for example. So it is an expression of heaviness. So sometimes Saturn can feel heavy in its action. So we have the heaviness, we have the sense of what you sow, you shall reap. We have the idea that Saturn, as ruler of time, rules when everything ends. Time ends all things. Whenever I think about Saturn in this way, I get a vision of a scene in Supernatural. People who know me well know that I love the show Supernatural. And there is this wonderful scene where Dean, one of the main characters, is speaking with the figure of Death. And Death very quietly turns to Dean and says, of God, in the end, I will reap him too. As far as Saturn is concerned, everything is finite. Saturn is Lord of Karma. He is old Father Time. He's a wise old man with aeons of experience to bring. And so in astrology, he teaches us something of the wisdom of experience. Nothing can replace practical experience. Where Saturn moves in the chart, he teaches us that there is work to be done here. That is the first phrase I use when I see Saturn in the chart. This is where we need to do the work. This is where we are likely to experience some kind of tests and trials. And those tests and trials can often come in the form of feelings of delay or restriction, or again, it can feel heavy like lead. It can feel like we're hemmed in. Again, the idea of the prison, Tartarus, this sense that I can't get out of this. We can't get out of it because Saturn wants us to be in it to gain the experience that we need to put this house in order. Saturn is associated with structure and integrity. And if we can follow Saturn's instructions, then we can accomplish something really noteworthy. I always say Saturn knows that we are far more capable than we think we are. So he teaches us something about what it means to take responsibility, what it means to commit. He teaches us about how to adult in life, something that we often don't particularly like. He also teaches us about where we're limiting ourselves. And at the same time, he teaches us to know our true limits. Again, as far as Saturn is concerned, everything has a limit. There are boundaries that we must respect. And so if we work with all of this kind of material, then we can really see how we can get the house in order, because Saturn brings a real sense of authority, like stepping into your authority. Now, when Saturn is working in shadow, it can manifest as self-doubt. We hold ourselves back. We are reticent. We are overly cautious. Some caution, as far as Saturn is concerned, is a good thing. But if we're too cautious, then we're not going to get anything done. So we have limitations. Again, the idea of limitation. We're holding ourselves back because of the self-concept that we have. We don't believe that we're good enough, that we're able enough. We don't believe that we're capable of doing the task that Saturn has set out for us to do. We feel restricted, and maybe we are restricted by circumstances, but often that restriction is in itself the test. It pushes us to find the best in ourselves, to find a way out of that situation, or to find a way to manage that situation if it cannot be escaped or changed at that time. Saturn can also manifest as disease as well. So it could be just dis-ease. I feel uneasy about this situation, but it can also be disease of the body or some kind of dis-ease in the environment. Now that leads very neatly to a little bit of reflection on Saturn in Aquarius, because I think it's always important to sort of get an idea of how this last transit was working and what that was about, so that we can understand what we're moving towards. So Saturn in Aquarius, basically speaking, was just about the entirety of the COVID experience. So, of course, we had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, January 2020, which suggested that there was going to be some kind of very serious transformation as far as the structures were concerned, some kind of very big test, in other words. Saturn then moved into Aquarius in March 2020, on the 22nd of March 2020, and on the 23rd of March 2020, Boris Johnson in the UK announced our first lockdown. Saturn in Aquarius generally was the airborne disease, air, Aquarius, and then the disease coming from Saturn, the airborne disease that restricted Saturn, our freedom, Aquarius. It taught us a lot about how we see ourselves as a society. It tested society. Of course, we were very split on, whether this was right or wrong to do lockdowns, not do lockdowns. Is it real? Is it not real? All of that kind of stuff came out. So it was a massive test for us as a society. And of course, whether or not we like the politicians, it was a huge test for the politicians as well. And there was this whole idea of everyone needs to work together for the future. And that was a story of Saturn in Aquarius. Perhaps not in the ways that the political organizations were instructing, but the idea of consolidation, of people coming together to create a foundation for the future. Certainly Saturn in Aquarius was connected with that. Now, clearly COVID was the huge story of Saturn in Aquarius, but we also had some other stories coming in about the new and the different becoming mainstream, and also the challenges of the new and the different to the mainstream. So those kinds of stories were also part of Saturn in Aquarius as well. Now, if we think of Pisces is the last of all the signs. So whenever we have a movement into Pisces, there is some kind of sense of we are now finishing up and we are preparing for a new cycle for when the planet then moves into Aries. So there is some kind of sense that now we've got to bring everything together. Pisces is a water sign. It is associated with the oceans, and just as every single river runs to the ocean, eventually all experience, everything that we are experiencing, comes together in this single place. There is union and connectivity in Pisces. Everything is connected in Pisces. Pisces is symbolized by two fish swimming in opposite directions, and yet they are connected by a thread. And it is an expression of how we too, as a people, as a race, are all connected to one another. And when I say race, I mean the human race. We are all connected to one another and also to everything that is, whether it is seen in the material world, in the natural world, in the cosmos, or whether it is unseen in the spiritual worlds or in the far distant cosmos that we have yet to discover. So everything in Pisces is connected, thinking again, the last of the water signs. We all need water to live, whether we are animal, plant, or human. We must have water. We are made of water. So in Pisces, we speak of the pool of the collective unconscious, or the sea of the collective unconscious. All experience everything that we humans, and also perhaps all the other creatures as well, every creature that dreams, everything is pooled here in Pisces. Every story, every legend, every archetypal hero is in Pisces. This is the place of gods and monsters. This is the place of great dreams. So Pisces is very powerful, but it's very emotional and can also speak of the things that are intangible, the things that are difficult to name, to conceive of, and yet we can feel them. To understand how a transit might work, it's always helpful to look back at previous cycles of that transit. So I'm just going to have a look at the last cycle of Saturn in Pisces, which was from May 1993 up until April 1996, just to get an idea of what was happening then, because it will give us some clues as to what to expect going forwards. So the first thing that I noted is that there was the dissolution of Czechoslovakia, and then the European Economic Community created the European Single Market. Now, both of those things actually happened just before Saturn went into Pisces. But of course, it was under Saturn in Pisces when they were figuring out how all of this would work in practice. So they were testing the waters. Testing the waters is a phrase that I'm going to be using for Saturn in Pisces. Saturn in Pisces can also speak a lot of issues connected with war and peace. So we did have some difficult expressions of this. So we had the Iraq disarmament crisis. And this was when the Iraqis decided they didn't want to have the weapons inspectors going in to look at what they had there. And obviously that led to massive conflict. And I know that, of course, there is a much bigger story there. You know, it's not all one side or the other. But generally speaking, we can see that a crisis began to form between Iraq and America during the time when Saturn was in Pisces. And one of the most difficult expressions of Saturn in Pisces was the Rwanda genocide, which happened under this transit. But at the other end of the scale, Saturn in Pisces brought us Nelson Mandela becoming the first Black president of South Africa, a country that had previously been massively racially divided. Nelson Mandela brought peace. He brought the peoples together. The IRA in Ireland, they completely stopped their military operations under Saturn in Pisces. There was a little bit more that happened in 1996, but eventually the peace that they had promoted around that time was re-established. So the peace process really started under Saturn in Pisces. As far as the Irish Troubles were concerned, we also had Russia and China agreeing to not point their nuclear weapons at one another. So that was also an expression of peace in that time. And lastly, under this theme of war and peace, there was the creation of the Union for the Mediterranean, which was 27 nations in Europe signing the Barcelona Treaty, which effectively ended the Bosnian War. Some other expressions of Saturn in Pisces, a mathematician called Andrew Wiles from the UK won worldwide fame after presenting his proof of Fermat's last theorem. I cannot possibly even try to explain what this is about. It's something to do with maths. It was a maths theory that was unresolved for 3 centuries. And this man cracked it under Saturn in Pisces. What's interesting is he was born with Saturn conjunct Neptune, the ruler of Pisces. And it is illustrative of how Saturn in Pisces can speak of the invisible becoming visible or making sense of something that before has no sense. With Saturn in Pisces, what was unseen before becomes visible. That theme was echoed by the fact that we had the first photo of Pluto and its moon Charon being taken by the Hubble Space Telescope. That was also under Saturn in Pisces. Another interesting factor under Saturn in Pisces was the creation of an element, a man-made element, Copernicum, I think it's pronounced, which is actually a mixture of lead, Saturn, and zinc. So they managed to fuse these 2 elements into one. It's a bit unstable, but they managed to do it. Remember that Pisces brings things together and blends them into a whole. This is why we get the stories about peace, the potential for peace when Saturn is in Pisces. But of course, because Saturn is the challenger and doesn't like the sort of the loss of authority, then we can get people who express the furthest from peace because they want to grapple and hold on to their reality. The last Saturn in Pisces cycle also brought us the first female priests as far as the Church of England is concerned. So I would anticipate that there would be further changes with the Church of England going forwards to this next Saturn in Pisces transit. And I also just wanted to note some businesses that were born under Saturn in Pisces. So Amazon was founded. We've also got eBay. Sony PlayStation was released. We also had the first smartphone being released. And also this was the time when the gateway to the World Wide Web was released to kind of the public, which basically meant that anybody, the average person in America, could access the internet. So we can immediately see the idea of the interconnection of all things. and still talking about businesses, but rather than beginnings, now we're talking of an ending. We had Barings Bank, which was the UK's oldest investment banking firm. This collapsed after one of the brokers, Nick Leeson, lost $1.4 billion speculating on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. So basically it wiped out this very long-standing bank. It washed it away. So going forwards then, given the experience from the previous cycle, it's possible that we are looking at issues connected to infrastructures that are dissolving. Saturn is the structure and the order, but Pisces has no order. It is everything and nothing. Again, there are no boundaries, there are no walls. And Saturn comes into all of this and everything is being erased. It's like the image in my mind is like the waters of the ocean slowly eroding the rock of the cliff. Saturn is associated with rocks. So we have some kind of huge uncertainty here. This is the problem, because normally where Saturn goes, we can go to Saturn for the anchor, the grounding that we need. He tells us in this place, we've got some work to do. So if everything else is confusing, just come to me and, it'll all be fine. But in Pisces, we have this huge uncertainty. In fact, there was a really great headline. It was associated with the state of fashion, some kind of industry report. And the title of the report was Resilience in the Face of Uncertainty. What a perfect line for Saturn in Pisces. We do have this terrible uncertainty at the moment about where things are headed. We can see that there is some kind of changes to the infrastructures. We know that with Pluto going into Aquarius, there's going to be a massive transformation in society. And now we don't know where we're going. And so Saturn in Pisces is going to bring this to us and say, how well do we deal, and do you deal with uncertainty? How can you find that anchor within yourself? Often we look with Saturn, we look for accomplishment out there in the world. We look for certainty out there in the world. We go to our job at a certain time every day and we know what we're doing. These are the certainties, the structures that we have in place. But with Saturn in Pisces, it's going to be necessary to look within to find the anchor that we need to deal with all of the uncertainty that arises from Saturn in Pisces. We get scared of uncertainty. We get scared of what we don't know. We get scared of our own imagination sometimes. We scare ourselves. The 12th house can be associated with self-undoing. So is there some kind of issue here that Saturn is trying to help us with our own self-undoing? Instead of constantly fighting one another and the wars and the genocide and the constant blowing apart of peace. Instead of doing that, maybe we could join together if we realize, Saturn, if we realize that we actually are all connected. We are all one. This is what Saturn is trying to tell us. Now, it is possible, going back to some more general expressions of Saturn in Pisces, that we may have waterborne diseases. Remember, in COVID, going into Aquarius, we had the airborne disease. Now Saturn going into Pisces, we're speaking about the waters. Now, certainly in the UK, there is a massive issue at the moment that our government is allowing raw sewage to be pumped into rivers and along the coastline. It is just horrific to think about. And so clearly there's going to be more discussion about the fact that our waters are becoming very, very polluted. And of course, with that pollution can come diseases as well. There's also the potential for the fact that the water itself might be the problem, i.e., for example, the rising waters, flooding, these kinds of things that we're experiencing due to the climate crisis. There may be talks about building some kind of great big dam or At the other end of the scale, maybe we're talking about opening the floodgates for something coming in. So water is certainly a theme. The problems around water are certainly a theme with Saturn in Pisces. I mentioned earlier in the last cycle of Saturn in Pisces that the church ordained the first women priests. So I would anticipate that there would be further changes. I think I mentioned this before, that there would be further changes perhaps within the church. And also just on the theme of religions and spirituality, I just wanted to mention that the Dalai Lama is going to be coming up to his third Saturn return. He was born with Saturn in Pisces at 10 degrees of Pisces. So yes, he may be a feature of this period as well. Generally speaking, Saturn in Pisces can speak of the rules around churches and other kinds of places of worship. But if we flip that symbolism around, we could also be looking at the idea of how spirituality and religion, Pisces, can come into the authorities, and that there are some blurred lines here. We've already clearly seen this starting to happen in America with the issues around abortion. So I'm wondering if this might become more prominent, or the conversation about this might become more prominent. How much or how little spirituality plays a role in our political systems, or, in our systems of government. Something else I was thinking I meant to say before with Saturn in Pisces and the idea of the dissolving infrastructure is that Pisces can also be associated with charity. So it's possible that Saturn in Pisces is going to be an expression of the hard work of charities who are having to kind of take the place of supporting people where the governments are not supporting people. Again, we're already seeing a lot of that. Certainly in the UK, there's an organisation called DEFRA who is picking up the pieces kind of left over by government legislation. But we might find that charities really start to make a lot more noise during this time because there is such need for support. The challenge is that Saturn can represent restriction, and we are already seeing that charities are hugely under pressure. All different kinds of charities are under pressure because obviously now with the cost of living crisis in many countries, with everything kind of going up in price, a lot of people don't have money left over to donate to charities. So Saturn might also represent the restrictions that are placed around these charities. Another industry that might struggle during this time is the film industry. But at the same time, I was thinking about how amazing Saturn in Pisces can be for the realization of dreams. So this is going to be a very common theme for all of us, and I'm going to talk more about it in a moment. But just thinking about the film industry, yes, there may be some struggles, some limitations. There's not perhaps a lot of money coming through. And yet this might be the time when some real works of art come into being that truly stand the test of time. So that's works of art in the film industry, but also perhaps other types of works of art as well. Again, the imagination, Pisces, something being realized with Saturn. I also wondered, kind of going a bit woo-woo, but let's go there. Pisces, after all, it speaks of invisible realities. So is Saturn going to help us to see what is invisible? Does that mean seeing something in space that we have not seen before? Remembering this is connected to the cosmos. Is it proof of the soul? Is it proof of life after death? Is it proof of consciousness as a separate entity from the body? I'm just suggesting some ideas here, but these are some of the things that come to mind. Now, let's just rein this in a little and start to think about how this transit might work for us on a personal level. So the first thing is that given that this is the place of the collective unconscious, there is something of taking responsibility for our own imagination, our own unconscious, because we are all feeding into the collective unconscious. And what is happening with Saturn in Pisces is that it's saying what we dream becomes real. So we know that everything that occurs in life, everything that you can see, once began in the imagination of another person. My computer, the table, the phone, the cup, the packet of chewing gum on my desk, everything that I see in front of me here was once in the imagination of another human being. What is in our imagination tends to manifest. And that includes what we believe deep down inside of ourselves. If we have a negative belief system, a lot of limitations that are deep down in the unconscious, that can significantly impact how much we can accomplish out there in the world, because we hold ourselves back. So something of this transit is about making your imagination work for you instead of against you. I spoke earlier, I believe, about the 12th house and how it can be connected to the idea of undoing, self-undoing. So I think for all of us, we're kind of being told to do some work on the imagination. What are you imagining? Are you scaring yourself? Because these are the kinds of things that we need to confront. For some people who are particularly connected with this transit, maybe because you have a strong Pisces signature in your chart, some people may experience trouble sleeping, nightmares, or bad dreams. And I would definitely advocate for all of us, to be honest, whilst this transit is going on, to keep a dream diary. I think I've said in other videos on here before, but I've kept a dream diary for nearly 40 years. And I cannot impress on you how powerful that can be, the information that comes up from the unconscious. I'm thinking about making a separate video on dreams and astrology. Let me know if you're interested, by the way, in the comments, because a few people have been asking me about this recently. So I think it might be helpful given that we're going into Saturn in Pisces. So yes, there might be issues with dreams, but remembering that this is just information that is coming up that is ultimately going to be helpful. For all of us, we're going to find that Saturn going into our Pisces house is going to be some kind of reality check, because this is the part of life where we are naturally very imaginative and very idealistic, and maybe sometimes a little too relaxed for our own good, and maybe our boundaries are too relaxed, or they're just not there at all. So Saturn will come along and say, maybe we do need to get real here about some of these ideas and ideals that you have. Are they truly possible? In which case, great, we can work on manifesting them. Or perhaps if you have dreams that are just totally unrealistic, it is going to be time to let those go. And like I was saying with the boundaries, maybe we need to just create some better defenses here so that the energy is not just kind of dissipating, because this is the problem sometimes. Our efforts in the house with Pisces on the cusp can sometimes come to nothing because we set no boundaries and no structure, and because we are too idealistic. So Saturn comes along and he says, right, put the boundaries in place. Let's get real. How are you going to manifest your vision? Let's make a plan. You need to commit to a vision with Saturn in Pisces. It's time to commit to a vision. It's time to commit perhaps to your spiritual path, or to practice what you preach, to commit to your dream, the thing that is most meaningful for you. It's about no longer getting in your own way. Saturn in Pisces will teach you how to trust your intuition. The veil between the worlds is thin during this time. Remembering Saturn is the walls, it's being eroded by the ocean. So the veil is thin during this time. So we have kind of a greater connection, or a greater possibility of connection to our intuition. And your intuition is your authority. during this time. So it's very important that we connect to the inner self, like connecting to the source of the self whilst Saturn is in Pisces. Like I said before, very often we look outside of ourselves for some kind of anchor, but Saturn in Pisces is going to specifically ask us to go inwards. And if we feel like we don't really know what we believe and we don't really know what we think and it's all very wishy-washy, Saturn will come in and say, right, this needs to be sorted out, because you need to reconnect so that you can manifest a better dream for yourself. By the end of this transit, for all of us, we will have had the opportunity, the gift from Saturn, the abundance that the Romans knew of Saturn, is that we will have been able to create something extraordinary from our dreams, from our imagination. Something we thought we could only dream of is brought to life by Saturn. But to do that, we will all have to let go of certain ideals and dreams that aren't possible. We can't escape whilst Saturn is in Pisces. In the natural chart, the 12th house is associated with prisons. Remembering Kronos was thrown away into Tartarus. He had to wait until his son released him. And that is kind of like this transit, that there are times when we may feel like we're imprisoned in a certain situation, but it's all about how we look at it. If we look at it as, oh my God, I'm imprisoned and I'm never going to get out, then that is going to limit us. Whereas if we look at the situation we're in and say, I accept this, I accept where I am, I'm going to stop resisting this process, and I'm going to crystallize my vision whilst I'm in this place, then that is going to be the best way of seeing things. Sometimes we think we're trapped when we're not. And in fact, this transit really reminds me of the Eight of Swords in the tarot. If you look at the card, we have a woman here who is bound. She has swords behind her and she has a blindfold on her eyes. So she looks as though she can't get away from where she is until you look at her feet. Her feet are unbound. Pisces rules the feet. Her feet are unbound. She could simply walk away from this situation that she is in, but she is held captive by her thoughts. This is the sword. Swords is an anagram of words. Swords are connected with air and communication. So she is bound by her thoughts, blinded by her thoughts. And this is what can happen sometimes. We can get so scared of what our imagination is telling us that we can't see the reality of our situation. And even if our reality is difficult, back to Kronos in prison, even if it's a difficult reality we find ourselves in, remember, he is the Lord of time. Old Father Time ends everything. He brings everything to an end. Nothing lasts forever. Even a difficult circumstance doesn't last forever. Things change over time. Even just like, I'm just thinking about like chronic illness, like I have chronic illness. Okay, so that's not going to end, but I do learn to manage it better over time. So even then, there is always going to be changes. There's going to be some ups and downs. There's going to be better times and worse times. So Saturn is trying to help us to use our imagination in much better ways, to use it in a way that is going to bring us a sense of inner stability and put us directly in touch with that deep wisdom within. Because when you trust yourself, you can trust your intuition. This concludes part 1 of my exploration of Saturn in Pisces. I hope you found it helpful. There will be parts 2 and 3. That will be the horoscopes for Saturn in Pisces. Those will be coming shortly. If you enjoy my work, do check me out on Patreon. I will put the link below. And in the meantime, I wish you many blessings on your path.